On the podcast today, we are going to speak about Tat Tvam Asi, which is the greatest statement within spirituality, and we could say the greatest truth within spirituality, and is probably the core of all of Eastern spirituality and philosophy within Asia. And this great statement is first found within the Chandogya Upanishad. And Tat Tvam Asi actually means thou art that, or that art thou, or in simplistic terms, we could say you are that. But the you here, we will dissect who is the you that are that, and we will go deeper into that. And Tat Tvam Asi makes up one of the Mahavakyas, the four great Mahavakyas that we find within the Vedic civilization of India. And the other Mahavakyas are Aham Brahmasmi, which means I am Brahman. The next one is I am Atma Brahma, this self is Brahman. And then the fourth one is Pragyanam Brahma, which means Brahman is consciousness. Now, they all basically mean the same thing. And for whatever reason, Tat Tvam Asi is probably the most popular Mahavakya. And many have probably heard this. But we're going to dissect what it really means today, and we're going to go deep into the exploration of this concept of Tat Tvam Asi.
Yes, Tat Tvam Asi. Tat Tvam Asi in Hindu tradition, Hindu Dharmic tradition, but that thou art, you can also find the Christian mysticism as well. So that is to show that it doesn't matter what part of the world it is, that old wisdom tradition had the same idea of that you are that, Tat Tvam Asi, or that thou art.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, the you here, not being the person that you think you are, but something much deeper. Yeah. And this builds on the core philosophy, we could say, of Advaita Vedanta, which is the school of non-dualism, or the path of non-dualism, which is a path of jnana, of knowledge, the knowledge of Brahman. And a couple of the greatest teachers of this school is Shankara and Gaudapada. Now, one of the core phrases that you hear in a lot of the commentaries that Shankara meant when he, say for example, when he analyzes the Mandukya Upanishad or some of these other Upanishads, we hear Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, which means the world, Brahman alone exists.
Yes.
The world is an appearance. And so this is what we've got to remember when we try to understand Tat Tvam Asi. So Brahman alone exists. So there's only the oneness of reality. The persona, the Gayang, the Jason, the everyone listening or watching, is an appearance of that one reality. It's not actually, well, it's a part of the oneness, but it is not the essence of the oneness. It's in some sense Maya, illusion.
Yes. Yeah. Again, you mentioned earlier a little bit about dissecting what we mean by you here. You are that, right? That thou art. So we are exploring the very identity of ourselves, identity of an individual. So that's where the journey begins, and that's actually where journey ends as well, right? We are exploring who we truly are and what we are, and that is actually ultimate mystery for all of us, and it takes a lot of time to learn about ourselves. And socially we get to know about ourselves as we get older, but ultimately what we are, instead of asking who we are, is the goal of especially in Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah, exactly. And Advaita Vedanta, you could say, is the direct path. So like you said, it's the beginning, but also the end.
Yes.
And when you learn, for example, when you learn Tat Tvam Asi, say if you learn from a teacher and you have all these problems as a person, and they'll say, Tat Tvam Asi, you are that. You're dwelling in the appearance of reality or the illusion of subjectivity.
Yes.
And they try to reinforce you or bring your mind back to that you are Atman, which is the self, the undifferentiated consciousness that we all are, which is identical with Brahman, which is the ultimate reality of the whole existence,
Yes.
with the irreducible essence of the universe.
Yes.
And so we're constantly being redirected back to that, no, you are that, you are that. Like, get out of this habit of believing that you're this jiva
Yes.
persona system.
Yes.
And easier said than done.
It's shifting of perception is inevitable, because ourselves, us and the world, seemingly separated and dualistic when we coming from the perspective of bodily experience, right? But when we go further and further, more refine that perspective within our awareness and consciousness, then world becomes you, and we get into the non-dual state, non-dual consciousness. So again, like Dharmic tradition in Vedantic philosophy, they also made the framework of the human personality to identify these identities that we think we have, which is called the 5 koshas, the 5 sheaths of human personality. So like the first one being gross physical sheaths, second being the sheaths of prana or the vital force, third being sheaths of the mind, and next sheaths of intelligence or the buddhi, and the 5th one is the sheath of bliss. So as we explore from first one to the last one, from gross to the finer state of consciousness. So that's how they dissected. We have these 5 sheaths of personality or identity. But us identify ourselves with the body, vital force, mind, and the intelligence and buddhi, but never we get to the bliss state, right? So that is can be a problem, and it is a problem, and it can cause suffering not knowing it. So that's what we are going to talk about, isn't it?
Of course.
That to get to the bliss sheath, the Anandamaya kosha.
Yep. Well, the neutral witness or awareness, the pure awareness that we are, the Atman, the Purusha, the problem is it gets entangled with the first 4 sheaths.
Yes.
So it's identified with the gross, most of us are overly identified with the gross and physical reality, which is prevalent. Like we know this because look out in the world, look at how people are so focused on how they look, their appearance, or who they are, their status, and so forth and so on. So in some sense, as the Buddha said, like what you think of yourself, you become that, is true in this sense. But a better translation of that, because that's kind of a half-baked translation in English, is that where your awareness lies is what you identify with.
Yes.
So the awareness itself is pure, but the problem is it gets entangled with the mind and it gets entangled with the senses, and then you are engaged in the drama, but you forget that you're the witness of that. You forget you're the witness of all of the first 4 sheaths, and so you can never experience Anandamaya kosha, the 5th sheath, because Ananda is unassociated bliss. It's not bliss from something. Like, oh, I'm blissful because I ate this chocolate cake, or shanti, or I've had a great experience with someone. And these are all well and good, there's nothing negative about that. But the thing is that's not the unassociated bliss that we're talking about. Because to get there, the awareness, you have to abide as the awareness. You can't just say, oh, I had an experience of Atman, but it's more of a abidance of that awareness.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, when we identify ourselves with the gross body level, I am this, I am, I don't know, short, tall, slim, all this kind of. But then, who is the one that making the statement there? Like when you say that I am that body or person, right? Again, with the mind intelligence, their level is the same. Like, but all these other 4 sheaths of human personality are playing out in a field of senses or the mind, right?
Yep.
But senses are themselves incapable of perceiving themselves, neither as mind. Mind cannot be aware of itself, just like how a mirror can reflect on its own look, right? So what can really reflect, what can really illuminate light on mind and the senses is that pure awareness, that pure witness state. That is what we are. That is the Atman and the Brahman. So you are that whole substratum of whole beings, whole states of consciousness.
Yeah, the mind is a tool, and we forget that because we get so engaged in the mind, then we think that we are this mind. But when we use a hammer, we don't try to become the hammer. So the mind itself is just a tool that is like an interface with the internal and external realities.
Yes.
But we forget what's behind the mind. We forget that pure awareness. And then we become the objects of knowledge that the mind interprets, right? Like we become whatever we want in the physical world. We identify with this and that, which is what Maya is, right? Maya is the measurement of reality, which begins in the mind and is influenced by the senses, because we have the sensory experience and then we think that, well, this must be fundamentally real. But it's happening within the ultimate consciousness.
Yes.
It's not an experience in and of itself. It's the appearance of Brahman. And so what we are doing then is we are identifying, we are this localization of consciousness. We all are the localization of the one consciousness, but we identify with the equipment of the consciousness, which is the body, the mind, our sensory experiences, etc. And we forget that we are just a localization of that one consciousness. And this is a really important point when we talk about Tat Tvam Asi, because when you understand that you are that, then you have to understand then who is the doer of actions and the thinker of thoughts. Is it really you as a person, or is something more going on here? Because when we look at a great jnani, an enlightened sage, we would say that they are the non-doer, as opposed to Brahman being the all-doer. Because Brahman is the all-doer, the jnani becomes the non-doer. Now that may sound strange, but the thing is that when you're out of the experience of the first four sheaths, then it's, as Sri Ramana Maharshi said, what will be done, try as you may to prevent it. So he's saying that there's almost like not predetermined reality, but it's just that all that's happening here is Brahman itself. Is to use the will of Shiva, for example, is moving through all of us. Now, some people don't like the word will, but let's say the energy of Shiva is moving through us, and so the actions are happening of themselves. It's an eternal happening or becoming. But we then claim the experience and think we are the one doing it, or this and that, because we have a sense of agency.
Yes.
But is it really us that is doing the actions, thinking the thoughts, or are they happening of themselves without our own awareness of it?
Again, I really like the ocean and wave analogy. That nice, calm ocean being that pure consciousness, the substratum of all things, that pure awareness, the consciousness, and waves and the bubbles and all that kind of movement of the water in the ocean are the movement of mind and senses. But just like how it doesn't make any sense when the wave and the bubbles go and saying like, oh, I'm not part of water, I'm not part of the ocean, That's just ridiculous, right? So, but that's what we are doing because we are just so unaware, and we are ignorant to say that we are ignoring that we are that, right? We are not acknowledging that we are that, right?
Yep.
Somewhat because a lot of us are asleep, we're not awake. That's why we think like that. But again, the movement of mind, and when senses get stimulated, that kind of action, the movement on its own, is only just the waves and just bubbles that occurs in the ocean. That's all there is. When the wave goes away and ocean becomes back to that calm state, the original state, and again, that being the pure consciousness, which what we are really.
Yep. It's interesting with what you said, because when we think about it, those in the world who try to stand out the most, or try to be the loudest, or try to look a certain way to gain attention, are the most lost, because they're trying to exaggerate their identification or their identity. And so you go further and further away from Brahman, or you forget the Tao, as we've spoke about in a lot of other podcasts. And this is why when we look in India and China, like if we look at the yogic tradition or the Vedic tradition, or if we look in the Taoist tradition, or even the Buddhist tradition as well, there is an emphasis on simplicity and being very simple and not adding too many things to yourself, because you become closer and closer with the way it actually is, and you don't giving your mind anything to pick up and to play with, which deludes you into thinking that you are this person or this special person, which is, as you said, that's what breeds a state of sleep. And actually why a lot of people in the world are asleep, because they want to be special. They think they need to be special to belong, but you inherently belong.
Yes.
You don't need to be special. You are loved by the Absolute no matter what. So you don't need to think that you have to fit into a certain system within culture or a certain ideology or this and that. The key is to simplify your life, not complexify it. And that brings you closer to the actual nature of reality.
Yes.
And that's what's really important. That's why, like, in a couple of the chapters that we've mentioned earlier in the podcast with the Tao Te Ching, where Lao Tzu has a big emphasis on simplicity and not complicating your life.
Yes.
And just being in the real soil and the dirt of the world.
Yes.
So you're real salt of the earth.
Yes.
And that's what brings us closer and closer to this statement, to Tat Tvam Asi. When you start to realizing that you are that. But when you're out there and you're trying to be someone, and you're trying to gain attention, and you're trying to highlight your identity over others, that's when you go further and further away from the Tao or Brahman.
Yes. Realizing what it means by Tat Tvam Asi and other three statements, these are the great truth of human being, of humanity, and realizing the fact that we are that and understanding what that means is the ultimate goal of human existence, I believe. And this knowledge has been around for how long, you think? Like 50,000 years?
Oh,
Could be longer.
I don't know.
Yes.
I wouldn't say 50. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah. But, yeah, so that being, I would say that the oldest knowledge that there is, and the most truthful knowledge for humanity to introduce to, right?
Yep.
And so that ultimate goal of the Advaita Vedanta is especially is to realize that who we truly are, what we truly are. That being the Jivan Mukta.
Yeah, the self, the Atman.
Yes, the Atman.
That's what we are. We're not
Yes.
this person. We're not this person wound up in this play, this drama where we're involved and we think we're special, or we think that we are what we imagine of ourselves,
Yes.
our own self-image. We're none of that. That's all a play of existence. That is Maya. And so, as you were saying, the role of Advaita Vedanta and how to gain jnana, knowledge, is to realize that you were always the self, the Atman, but you forgot. And that's why it's the direct path.
Yeah, so understanding this the great philosophy of our being is always coming from deep exploration of ourselves. And that exploration of ourselves only can come from direct experience, intimate experience with the self within, I think. And that experience now is eliminated by too much distractions, right? Like, for instance, when you get on the car and drive somewhere, or get on a bus or train or something, going somewhere, all people do I see around is, I don't know, looking at the phone, listening to the music. So to me, what that does is that eliminating your direct experience of what you were doing in that very moment. Like when you're driving, like people randomly call someone because you feel bored, right? Saying hello and where you're going, you kind of commenting on what you're doing, right? To your friend or family members or whatnot. Or you're listening to a radio, daydreaming, listening to the music, and instead just stay in silence. Just enjoy the scenery that you see around, and just that whole experience that you are having in that very moment, right? Just like when you're in a public transport, for instance, or even when you go for a walk, there is that direct experience, intimate happening around you, which gives you a lot of time to think about what's happening inside you, right? If some thoughts are popping up, like Brahman is coming up funny today, like there is this joke, right? And some just random thoughts coming up, and it comes to the surface, then you acknowledge what it is, you are aware of it, instead of going with the thoughts. You are observing your own thoughts and just being complete present in that very moment, from experiencing directly, instead of cutting all the senses off, listening to music, watching the shows on the phone and the train, or even like some cases I see people watching something when they are walking. That's just a complete ignorance of the exploration of your own life, really. And that's just eliminating a whole opportunity to find out and discover what's happening inside you in that very moment. So that this distraction itself becomes a huge challenge and obstacle for all of us to just live simply. But being a simple-minded individual and bring that simplicity into our lifestyle is the very first step to realize what we truly are.
It's a great point, because that, as you were saying, that cuts you off from the actual experience you're having. And so what you're doing then is you're living in your own world. You're not living in the world, you're living in your world. As you said, some people walk around watching things on their phone. I don't know how it's possible to navigate through the obstacles that you need to. And you always see people with things in their ears. And so that's directly cutting you off from the experience. And I know a lot of people these days, they, for whatever reason, stick up for technology, even though that's what it's doing to us. It's cutting us off from the actual experience of life. And so you're constantly engaged in your senses, and you're constantly engaged in your story, in your mind.
Yeah.
And so what you and I see, because we don't have any of that when we walk around, or if we're on a bus and, you know, we don't obviously have a phone and listen to it and stuff, we see people overly engaged, and you see in their eyes there's a dullness and this and that, because you're engaged in your own story. And then when you sort of snap them out of that and they look around, they forgot that they were actually in the world. They were in that world, which is basically a representation of what's going on in their world, in their mind. And so this is why it's very important within, say, the yogic tradition, but it's also practiced in Vedanta. Obviously in other traditions like Buddhism and Taoism, is Pratyahara. Pratyahara is the withdrawal of the senses. So withdrawing your senses from letting them get engaged in all of these things. And as I was mentioning earlier, and why you brought that up, is because the more you do that, the more you come back in alignment with simplicity,
Yes.
the more you start to feel the essence of Atman, the undifferentiated within you, because your mind is not picking up things. Right, this looks fun, this looks fun. You're stopping all of that. It's a withdrawal of the senses. And what happens when you withdraw the senses is you can see actually through your mind, and your mind is actually just reflective and transparent. And so when you can see through your mind, you can see straight into your own nature. The mind itself is empty, spontaneous, and free, but we try to give it a form. The mind's natural habit is to try and solidify itself. That's what it does.
Yeah.
So it's trying to pick up things to make a story. And what you and I are talking about here today is to end the story.
Yes.
And so to end the story, you need to practice Pratyahara. And you really do need to, especially if you're engaged in spirituality and spiritual practice, you really have to reconsider your relationship with technology and always being plugged in. Because from people who know deep meditation and spirituality, they know that if you're always engaged in that, then you're still far away, because you're still engaged in your own mind. And look, there may be some reasons why you're listening to whatever's on your phone and this and that, but all the time, like, that's where I'm a bit suspicious. If you're always engaged all the time,
Yes.
you're basically just living in your own world. And Tat Tvam Asi is about destroying your world.
Yes.
That you is not your story. It's not the jiva. It's the Atman.
Yes.
You were always that, but you forgot because you were engaged in all of these things.
Yeah, the journey from ignorance to knowledge, isn't it? The ignorance being not knowing something, not knowing knowledge itself or anything like that. It's just ignorance of knowing that we are that undifferentiated consciousness. That's what it is, right?
Yeah. And that's why this is a direct path, because we're trying to get to that stage, but we're trying to, in some sense, liberate ourselves because we feel that we need to be liberated. But from the state of the Atman, you're already that.
Yes.
There is no one to be liberated. There's no one that dies. There's no one that did this or that. You're already that.
Yes.
And that's why this path the direct path can be a bit difficult for people, because, and look, we can say cultivation is good on a certain level, but we then can become cultivating addicts then, where we're practicing a spiritual path for so long because we're addicted to doing it, and we're not really bearing the fruit of the practice. We're not bearing the fruit of Tat Tvam Asi. We're not realizing that we're already that. So that's why when people go to, let's say, a guru, and the guru says, that they might say that they've been practicing all of these yogas or Tai Chi Chuan, and they've been doing it for years, but they still haven't had that experience. And their medicine is just, you are that, Tat Tvam Asi.
Yes.
And they're, what do you mean? Like, it's, you gotta cut this journey that you think you're on, because that's what's postponing your enlightenment.
When you are in motion in your mind, you don't really realize that you are actually in emotion, right? Because you are going with your thoughts. You are in the thoughts, afterthoughts. You are going with them, right? Your mind is always in motion. But when we finally stop, then we realize that, I was going crazy in my mind. Too many things are happening in my head. Like people say these things, right? But that realization only comes when we stop things, right? Stop the story.
Yep.
Stop the motion of the mind, right? Just the giving a complete stoppage to all things.
Yeah. Well, spirituality can be a story too. So they'll make their own story. So, I now practice Qigong. I'm a Qigong practitioner, and I'm going to be Qigong practitioner forever. And I would say, look, there's nothing wrong inherently with that.
Yeah.
But are you delaying the understanding of this, of Tat Tvam Asi?
Yeah.
Like, or are you engaged in your spiritual practice, but you have an understanding, like Shunro Suzuki said, we practice just because that's what Buddhists do.
Yes.
But you need to understand this. And so sometimes people understand this first and then they get engaged in spiritual practice, and some people understand this later on or midstream. But that's one of the big problems, is that we think we need to free ourselves, but we're fundamentally free. That's a paradox. So I would need to free myself. I need to be liberated. But you're already that. I mean, you only think you're not that because you're encased in this mind.
Yeah. Again, the level of perception, isn't it? From that highest perspective, everyone is already enlightened.
Yeah.
Right? There is not such an agent to be enlightened because you already are that.
Yeah.
So that you are already enlightened. But we don't live in that perspective. We don't live in that level of awareness, right? Most of us living in the state of avidya, the ignorance, so that we think that we need to be liberated, we need to be enlightened, we need help and salvation and all these things. But that we again is coming down to the identification. You identify yourself with your persona, with your mind. So journey is not to learn all these intellectual knowledge, right? Intellectual knowledge is still gets accumulated in the state of mind, not in a pure consciousness level. It's a job for us to do is to undo everything, undo this gross body, undo the vital force, undo the mind and the intellect, to undo everything. When we can just peel the layers of an onion, let's say, then you can finally get into the core of that onion, which is actually empty, right? And that is the journey that we all are on, and that realization will give the real knowledge, which is a self-knowledge, the experiential knowledge based on that, coming from that pure consciousness state.
Yeah. So we dwell on the illusion of identity, each and every one of us, and the illusion of the world. And that breeds our story, which is a delusion. So we create our own delusion, but there's just differing degrees of delusion. So you'll see someone who's delusional, who thinks that they're an identity, who'll go to war or incite violence, and then you see other ones who will just, be depressed or stressed, and this is still these are different degrees of the same delusion.
Yes,
it's the over-identification with this idea of who you are. You've gone through a socialization process that's built this identity, and you think that's who you are. But what were you before you were born? That's one of the great Zen koans, right? What were you before you were born, as opposed to what you are now, what you have become. As you said, peel those layers of onion back, as what they explain in the Upanishads, where when you look into the side of seed, there's nothing. And that's one of the great teachings, right?
In that nothingness, fruit come to existence, right?
Exactly.
So just that realizing that real nature of all things is that emptiness, is that vastness.
Yeah, the vastness,
Yeah.
That's right. Like even if we look at Taoist metaphysics, like Wu Chi is Tao and stillness. It's the origin of the universe. The Tao of nothingness, actually, as well, you could say, which gives birth to Tai Chi, which is the Tao of motion, which gives birth to yin and yang, the polarities of the universe, which gives birth then to the Tai Chi creature, which is us. But the point is that it all arises from nothingness or emptiness. Yes. It depends on if you want to think that that's a substance or whatnot. You're getting into fine detail then. But it's still the same. If you using the word experience is a bad word, but if you abide as the self or as the Atman, you know that to be true. Because when you're in that witnessing state, you see your mind, as you were saying before, bubbling up and the waves are moving around, but you're abiding as the ocean.
Yes.
And you're just looking at it as a movie on a screen. But this screen is a screen of consciousness that you're looking at it. And it's just moving around, doing its thing, and you're shanti going, well, as you said, the Shiva's coming on funny today, isn't it?
Well, speaking of a story, screen is a great analogy, I think. Screen being a substratum of all things, which is a pure consciousness. And when you roll a different film, and different story plays out, right? But the screen is screen. Without the film, the screen stays as what it is, right? And depends on what kind of film we put into our head and you want to project on screen. But we believe that film itself, what you see itself is the screen, but it's quite the other way around. We know that.
Yeah, we think the images on the screen are who we are.
Yes.
And it's like, but you can just wipe those off. If you stop playing that film, there's only the screen. And so we get so engaged in the images within our mind. And when you abide as the self, then, or the Atman, then you see the images arising that in some sense are in the depth of your samskaras, your subconscious. And the problem is then we get in this habit then when they arise, our vasanas, our habits and tendencies are built on them, which contributes to karma, our action and unconscious actions. And then we keep this whole film going, but this is the film of samsara. The film of you coming back life after life, because you haven't realized that you are the witness of this movie and you're just fully engaged in it. Yes. And so you have to fundamentally realize, and it's difficult because we get so engaged in our own story that you are already that. You are already free. You're already liberated right now. There's nothing that needs to be done. It's a different orientation. Yes. You know, if you've got your earbuds in, if you've got your phone on, you're watching TV all the time and this and that, it's going to be more difficult to understand that. But you can still do those activities and abide as that. Yes. Like a lot of people will say, oh, look, Sri Ramana Maharshi would read the newspaper, but his level of consciousness is far beyond all of ours. He might briefly read the newspaper too, like they exaggerated it when they took one photo of him with a newspaper. And it's that, as I mentioned earlier, the jnani is the non-doer, or they're not. It's not the same experience as how we experience. Like we may read a newspaper and get agitated by what's there, where Bhagavan's reading it and just
passive observer,
just seeing what's happening in the world, but not having a this or that perspective of what he's reading.
Yes. Yeah. The one of the greatest book that I'm reading, the Self-Knowledge by Shankara. And the third verse of the writings is about that action and the doer. And some Vedantists believe that, we had this conversation, believes that as long as you are alive, meaning that you have a form of this physical meat suit, physical body, you are not going to be able to fully understand what it means to be abide as Atman, right? Because as long as you have this body, there is a doing, there is action, there is doing. When there is action, and there must be some sort of agent, a doer of it. But as you said, our job is to remain as non-doer, while all these actions, seemingly you are doing something, but it's actually just a happening. But there is saying the eternal happening, right?
Yep.
It's doing its own thing while you remain as a non-doer. You don't identify as an agent or a doer, right? Again, that is the place where we want to abide permanently. And from living in that place, there is that immense blissful feeling that comes because you're completely free from your own action. You are free from everything. You realize that you are not actually a doer. Again, like that saying from Ramana Maharshi, that the karma, prapta karmas, that you can prevent or you can try as much as you want something to happen, but what will happen, no matter what you do. Try as you may.
Exactly.
Right? So just abiding in that place and just being passive observer of this happening of your life as well. Like you have to detach from that, right? Why is it happening to me? Life is, crap and this and that. But we need to keep a good distance, actually. Once we can keep the distance, actually it's all good. Life is good. You're fine.
See, it's a person, why is it happening to me? You're expecting a result from what your actions are. That's what Bhagavan was saying, right? Bhagavan's saying, in some sense, when you're not expecting anything from what you do because you're dissociated with the person, you just do what then need to be done. That's why in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna is teaching Arjuna about nishkarma karma, which is not being attached to the fruit of your own action. So just do what needs to be done. And they take that story to an extreme in Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna has to fight his cousins in war. But that's what's required of him as a warrior. That's his dharma, that's his duty, and what he needs to fulfill. And there's a great relief in that. And we spoke in a podcast recently about when we talk about like a lot of people taking dopamine dumps and this and that, where to heal that, instead of giving your mind things to do and you actively doing what you want to do, instead do what needs to be done. And you find a great peace in that. Okay, rubbish needs to be taken out. Floor hasn't been swept in a while. And then once you do this, you start to feel like this great sense of equanimity. And that's what it is. That's what Bhagavan is saying. Because when you're seeking to do what you want to do, then when things go awry, then you go, why is this happening to me? Because see, it's what you want to do as a jiva. But when you do what you need, what just needs to be done, because that's the will of Shiva, then it's very peaceful. Sometimes we need to also accept our position in life. For example, you and I do this, we need to accept what we're doing here. But then if we try to make a podcast about knitting, then we don't, because we like knitting, then we're not going to, but this is what our life has naturally been led to without even trying. And so that's the point, right? It's about when we get out of that state of, I want to do this, and if it doesn't happen, then I'm going to be very upset, then that's a state of delusion. So you need to get out of that and just, as you said with Ramana, just what will happen will happen. Try, and if it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter. Move on. And it's easy to move on because you're not identified with your identity, or the things that they're identified with, the accomplishments and the results that you see.
I mean, whenever things go wrong in your life, and I think that actually is a great opportunity to step back. And also when things go right as well, don't take the accomplishment to your own self.
That's a big problem.
Yes, I did that. I made that happen. No, it just happened. And you need to detach from, again, the doer and agent, the idea of a person there. You need to be completely free from it. And when we can do it again, we can really be truly happy, blissful, and live as that.
Yeah. It's a grasping, isn't it? As you mentioned, like when you gain an accomplishment or you have a great experience, you want to hold on to that. I want to have that experience again. And, alternatively, when you have a bad experience, you're trying to avoid that. It's the same grasping.
Yes.
And so what we're learning here is to be the neutral witness. If that happens, all well and good. If that happens, all well and good.
Yes.
But it's not being associated with either.
No.
Because that's what leads to great trouble. And that's actually what leads to suffering, because then you attach to the accomplishments and you even attach to the suffering.
Yes.
Because you're trying to avoid that. But suffering negative things in your life will inevitably come.
Yes.
There'll be funny situations, there'll be things that you would not have wished had happened, but they often do happen.
Yeah, so see, like when you don't remain as neutral awareness, then accomplishment or failure, you attach that experience with your own person, then that keeps perpetually creating the cycle of samskaras, right? The vasanas. You keep accumulating. You take the credit from accomplishment, or you just blame for a certain life experience. Why did it happen to me? That sort of attachment only keeps creating the cycle of suffering, really. It's the vasanas, samskaras, that you are only keep creating, keep accumulating. It's not good. It's not good. You need to step back. You need to detach from it.
You need to sell all of that or get rid of all of that karmic debt.
Well, that's it.
And the reason why a sage doesn't have any of that karmic debt that we accumulate is because they're not identified with it. See, they're still experiencing life, but they're essentially karma-free. And there's a word in Sanskrit, manonsha, and that is someone who has completely obliterated, in some sense, the identification, or completely dissociated with it. So we mentioned Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi before. You could mention Gautama the Buddha or any of these great figures throughout time who have had a permanent abidance in the Atman. And some people don't believe in that, but we have these great beings, and so they've had this permanent abidance. Some of us may have a temporary experience of the Atman or Samadhi, right? Yes. But it's in a permanent abidance. And so what happens then is Bhagavan's not identified as Venkantaraman, who he was as a boy.
Yes.
He doesn't have identity no more. And so he's still out walking around and eating and doing this and that and teaching. But he's not identified with, oh, look how great this is. I'm a teacher now, and and doing anything silly that some people probably would, who are very subjective and individual.
Yes.
And so, from that perspective, he is karma free. And so, the thing is that when you are not associated then or identified with the actions that you have or the thoughts and this and that you had, you notice that the vasanas and that start to burn away. This is what Ramana was saying. A lot of people would say, how do I burn away or get rid of my vasanas? I've been practicing yoga for this and that and so forth and so on. And one of the practices just is dissociating with the person who has these. And so when you're continually dissociating with it, like, oh, why me? What, poor me? Why me? Why me? When you dissociate from that, and you do that for long periods of time, then you start to see these underlying habits and tendencies start to disappear.
Yes.
And then that's when your karmic stock is gone.
Slowly, disappear.
Because a lot of people say, how do I get rid of all my karmas? And, Bhagavan would say just turn away from it. Stop paying attention to it and stop being the one who has accumulated that
Yes.
karmic stock. So
Yeah, like we like to take credit from our own achievement, and when things go wrong, we just beat ourselves down, right? Like I'm such an idiot, and this, and we blame ourselves, and this and that. But all these things is just to keep going around the cycle of some samsara with the your accumulated vasanas and samskaras, right? But yeah, you just need to look the other way. But there is a fact that when Swami said that some vasanas might not go away, right? But again, what we can do is just to be a passive observer. That's the only way that's the only remedy to this. And that's what's going to stop suffering.
because think about it, if you are identified with the vasanas, then you're going to act out those vasanas. But if you're a neutral observer of those vasanas, you can feel them
Yes.
coming through your system, but you don't act on them.
Yes.
What's that going to do? And that's what Ramana was saying. That's what you're putting them in the fire then. You're burning them away. So it might not happen overnight, that's for sure, because you've had them for a lifetime and previous lifetimes. And so it may take time, but the more that you abide as the pure awareness and witness those vasanas, then the more that you won't create any more karma for yourself.
Yes.
Because if you act on the vasanas, that stimulates karma, and then karma that's where the karmic stock then goes into the samskaras. And then you've got this whole samsaric loop, which creates a jiva. And the only way to dissolve that is pure awareness, is to observe that and not to act on that.
Yes. So it might still get stimulated, the vasanas and samskaras from, daily life and whatnot, right? But just not reacting from the stimulation of vasanas and samskaras, they no longer have any effect on you, right? So you're just you need to be very somewhat subtly sensitive about this movement. It happens very subtly, right? But once you can be in that subtlety, we have a key to realization, right?
Yeah. Yeah, someone said to me once, because they asked me about what we're talking about now, and said, but it really, like, when something happens,
It's strong.
It's strong. The vasanas come strong, and I'm really like on fire. And I said to them, that's great, because if you're observing that, then you watch that fire, it'll turn into a furnace, and it's raging. But then what you'll see is it'll slowly subside.
Yep.
It may take a bit of time. It'll slowly subside. And then after it, you'll feel a different state of equanimity because you didn't act on it. Because a lot of times we might act on it, right? Because we think it's the right thing to do, but we may offend someone unnecessarily because we were trying to defend ourselves or we were trying to prove our point. And then we don't feel great after it.
No.
Because in the end of the day, they are our brother and sister as well. And even if they were behaving a little stupid and this and that, and maybe they needed to be brought into line, it still doesn't feel right because we may have not worded it correctly. We may have done something, because oftentimes when the vasanas are coming on strong, we don't think clearly because it's raging and we're just like,
fire is too strong.
blah, and then it doesn't contribute to any harmony.
Yes.
So one teacher said once, the way to kill the ego is when the pain is so strong or the fire is so strong, just let it. It just, all that's happening is the ego is dying. It's just burning up and burning up and burning up because you're not reacting from that illusion, which keeps the story going. Because as soon as you act from those vasanas, you're saying, even though this spirituality that we're talking about, abiding as the Atman, and saying it's all well and good, but this is what's important. So that's what keeps the hypnosis going.
So when we can watch the fire is burning, then we can we remain as a passive observer, right? And just let it melt away, and in that process, we are almost like empowering ourselves, right? From not reacting from the fire, but just being passive observer of that burning fire.
Exactly.
You are actually empowering your inner being, yourself, right? The real self. You empowering that self.
Exactly. You use a house analogy, right? Like, so the house is there. Outside of the house is all of the karma, all the things where the things are happening. And inside the house is our vasanas in the first floor, and the samskaras are in the basement. How do we get into the samskaras? Well, you got to burn that house down. Completely burn it down. And so once you burn it down, and then the samskaras the basement is exposed, then everything is free. Then, like, you have merged with everything.
Yes.
There's no walls separating you from everything else, from the oneness of reality. But you have to allow that in. You have to allow that experience to happen.
Yes.
And look, sometimes there will be times where you do have to practice self-preservation. But most of the time you don't, right? Like, most of the time our vasanas and that get stimulated because we think a different way to some person and we want to prove our point.
Yes.
Or we have something to say, or we don't like what someone said, so we're going to tell them what we think.
This is the right way.
This is the right way. Usually we don't have like circumstances where we have to run away from a lion and stuff like that in this day and age. It's more so psychological.
Yes.
And so people get so caught up in that reality, and then they are not aware of what they're doing in that process. Oh, I showed him, didn't I? Like, I gave him a piece of my mind. It's like, good on you.
Yeah.
Like, here's your gold medal. Like,
no, we know that we don't have to do it. And again, like you said, when we do act out from that place, in the end, you don't feel very good.
No.
Yes.
No. So, like, the point of Tat Tvam Asi and everything we've been speaking about is that we have to really reinforce that mentality, isn't it? That we are that.
Yes.
We are that. And a lot of people will say, well, it's easier to experience that when we're with a teacher and this and that.
Yeah.
But it's you could say it's a lifetime work. You know, you are going to slip up. There's no doubt about it. You're going to fall off the roller coaster and get back on, and life's going to have its way with you, because it has its way with all of us. But you have to bring your mind back to this truth that you are already that.
Exactly.
You don't have to go anywhere, do anything, achieve anything to gain this. You don't have to be a master of Hatha Yoga. You don't have to be a master of Zazen meditation. It's about understanding this. And sometimes when you understand this first, spiritual practices mean a lot more.
Means a lot more and a lot clearer,
yes.
I think.
Yeah, what the point of why you're doing that.
Yes.
Because in some sense, and we've mentioned this a lot on the podcast, that tilling the soil, meaning practicing some sort of spiritual practice, cultivating practice, is very helpful to understand this at a deeper level. You know, like sometimes you need to till the soil a little bit, or have a framework, as you and I talk about privately all the time, an intellectual framework to understand this a lot more.
Yes. Intellectual framework is important, and also experiential knowledge is very important as well.
Yes.
So when two come together, then your spiritual path practice will have a real truthful meaning to yourself.
It really will.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to, well, you know, in Vedanta, it's obvious, right? You have to study but also practice.
Yes.
Theory and practice actually they go hand in hand.
Yes.
A lot of people go, oh, you don't need theory, I'm the self. And then you see them and they're out the pub till 4 a.m. and on Netflix, and
Yes.
it's very hypocritical. And that's a big thing in the New Age, right? Because New Age spirituality will take a phrase like Tat Tvam Asi and use it in a way that they can just keep their vasanas, their habits and that, without actually doing any work on themselves.
Yes, only to protect your own ego.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of the times.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm that. What do I have to worry about it for? I'm already that. What do I need to listen to your podcast for? Know all this knowledge. I'm already that. Okay. If you're already that, why do you have to announce that you're already that?
Yes.
Like you're announcing that we need to get on a plane or something like that. If you're already that, you wouldn't need to announce that you're already that.
Yes.
Because there is no one to announce that there's that.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's why when you hear someone say, I am enlightened, that's the first indication that they're not enlightened. Because there is no I that can be enlightened.
Yeah. I just wanted to share this quote. I got it from listening to this really good talk from Swami Atmananda Udasin. So, I mean, like, this is what we've been talking about. But also, I think it's a good reminder, and also if you can bring it to your daily life every moment into practice, knowing this, I found it really helpful. So everything appears in this consciousness, everything is modification, a frequency of this consciousness. So there is no really outer world. The world that you see is only a modification in your consciousness as well as your mental world. And don't associate yourself with anything that is perceived. Associate yourself to that which is perceiving. So remain as a neutral witness.
And that's a statement on Sparsha Yoga, isn't it?
Yeah.
The yoga of no touch. Don't allow the mind to touch anything.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a great statement by Swami Atmananda.
Associate yourself. Don't associate yourself with anything that is perceived through the mind, objects, this, Maya, right? But associate yourself to that which is perceiving. It's a pure, the neutral witness.
So what's the truth? Well, the one who witnesses or what's being witnessed?
Yes.
The seer or the seen?
Yes.
And so you have to really make an effort and a distinction to especially if you're sincere about what we're speaking about, and most people are who watch and listen to the podcast, about abiding in that place. And so the more you're identifying with this and that, or with what you perceive, the further and further and further you go away from what you actually are.
Yeah, so when we know this seen and the seer come together, and that we fully realize that non-dual state within ourselves.
Exactly. Because there's no one who is experiencing it. The experiencer is dead.
Yes.
They're gone.
It's only
all there is beingness.
Yes.
So it's just, I was going to say it's just you, but it's that experience in itself.
Yes.
Without the illusion of the interference pattern of the ego. It's an interference pattern which interferes and distorts the reality that experiences.
Yes.
Doesn't even experience that which it is.
It's just happening, and we are just observing it.
Exactly. And in that way, we need to be like Arjuna on the battlefield. You are just moving as one with Brahman. There's not an Arjuna trying to win the war. There's an Arjuna that's just part of the war.
Yes.
Because his role is to be in the war.
Yes.
There is no he, though. There is no Arjuna in it. It's just a process of Brahman.
That Arjuna is playing the God's melody.
Exactly.
Become part of that melody.
Yeah.
There is no agent there. became the part of the eternal happening of Brahman.
Well said. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.